She was just 4 minutes from home. 4 minutes. My daughter walked the same sidewalk every day. She smiled, waved goodbye, and vanished. No screams. No witnesses. No body. Just her backpack in an abandoned yard, with a blood stain and a torn notebook page that read, "I'll explain later." That was 28 years ago. And I still don't have answers. I remember the sound of the door closing. That soft click still echoes in my mind every morning. That's the last sound I ever heard from my daughter, Lacey. It was March 4th, 1996. A Monday. Nothing special. Just cold enough to see your breath. The kind of morning where frost clung to mailboxes and the sun hadn't fully broken through the clouds. Lacey was always up early, especially on quiz days. She hated Mr. Geller's surprise algebra quizzes. That morning, she sat at the kitchen table humming nervously, chewing on her eraser, and flipping through her workbook like she was trying to memorize the formulas by osmosis. She wore her red windbreaker, the one she said made her look like a fast runner, and slung her backpack over one shoulder. She took a last sip of orange juice, turned to me and smiled. "See you after school, Mom?" That was 7:28 a.m. By 8:05 a.m. the school called. "Hi, Mrs. Talbot, is Lacey staying home sick today?" I dropped the towel I was folding. No, she left on time. I felt it then. The kind of dread that grips your lungs and refuses to let go. I grabbed my keys, slipped on my sneakers and ran out the front door. I called Jeff, her father. He was already at work but left immediately. By 8:30 a.m. we were both walking the neighborhood, knocking on doors, yelling her name. Then 9:12 a.m., the moment I can never forget. Janet Reeves, our neighbor 2 doors down, was standing at the edge of her property near the old Fisher house, long abandoned. "Claire," she said, "is this hers?" A purple backpack, half-zipped, sitting quietly in the grass like someone had placed it there. I walked slowly toward it, as if moving too fast would confirm something horrible. I picked it up. I didn't even have to open it. It was Lacey's. Her name was stitched inside in blue thread. The same bag we'd picked out at Target. The same one she doodled hearts all over. Inside was her math book, a granola bar, and a torn notebook page, the words written in her handwriting. "I'll explain later." Police arrived minutes later. They taped off the yard. K9 units were brought in. Reporters started circling by afternoon. Then came the blood. A faint smear along the inside of her bag. Not enough for DNA back then, but enough to confirm something had gone terribly, terribly wrong. And still, no one had seen anything. Theories ran wild. Some said she ran away. Others whispered about people in town, a former teacher, a creepy neighbor, a janitor from the school. None of it added up. Lacey didn't have a boyfriend. She wasn't depressed. She left with her backpack, planning to return after 7th period like she always did. The police looked at everyone, including us. Her father, Jeff, had moved out recently. They checked his alibi. Gas station footage showed him at work by 7:40 a.m. He was cleared. They looked at Todd Myers, the Briar Glen janitor, a man with a history of strange behavior and no alibi. But nothing stuck. He was questioned and released. After 7 days, the police chief made a public statement. "At this time, we cannot rule out that Lacey may have left voluntarily." Voluntarily? With her backpack lying in someone else's yard? With blood. That sentence, that betrayal, shifted public opinion. We went from grieving to defending our daughter's name. And the trail went cold. Within a month, all leads dried up. Within a year, the search stopped. They never found her coat, her shoes, her red windbreaker, her body. But I knew my daughter. Lacey would never run away. She would never leave me without a word. Something happened in those 4 minutes. Someone took her. And someone in this town knows exactly what happened. The official search began less than 2 hours after Lacey was reported missing. By then, the story had already begun to swell beyond Claire Talbot's living room. Police officers cordoned off the Fisher property. Neighbors gathered across the street, arms folded tightly across their chests, eyes scanning for anything they might have missed. The entire neighborhood had already turned into a crime scene. But without a body, without an eyewitness, there was still a question hanging over everyone's heads. Was this really a crime? The lead detective, Sergeant James Ellison, arrived on the scene by 10:15 a.m. He was a 17-year veteran of the Wexley Police Department and had worked 2 child abduction cases before, both of which turned out to be parental custody disputes. Lacey's disappearance felt different immediately. He would later describe the scene as eerily sterile. There were no drag marks, no dropped items except for the backpack. Not even a broken twig. Whoever did this knew how to leave without a trace. By 1 p.m., the Wexley Community Center had been converted into a staging area. Missing posters were being printed on the spot. Volunteers, over 80 of them, began walking block by block. The FBI was contacted, but Wexley's local PD was told the case had not yet met the criteria for federal assistance. The media, however, was already circling. That evening, WX9 aired the first footage of Claire Talbot in tears on her front porch, begging for information. Behind her, Jeff stood silently with clenched fists. He hadn't slept since the call. Neither had Claire. That night, she stayed up alone watching out the window, the porch light left on like a beacon. "I was afraid she'd come back, and wouldn't know where to go," she later said. But Lacey didn't come back. On the second day, cadaver dogs were brought in. They swept the wooded area behind the school, the drainage canal near the railroad tracks, and the edge of the Talbot neighborhood. The dogs caught a faint scent on Eldridge Street, just 1 block north of the abandoned house. But the trail went cold near a crosswalk. Police began reviewing footage from traffic cameras, ATM machines, and convenience stores, anywhere Lacey might have passed if she'd walked further than they thought. Nothing. The last verified sighting of her was her mother's goodbye at 7:28 a.m. That same day, Sergeant Ellison began questioning persons of interest. The first was Mr. Todd Myers, the Briar Glen janitor. He lived alone in a 1-bedroom trailer 5 miles outside of town. He had a record, not for violent crime but for loitering, trespassing, and a dismissed complaint from a teenage student in a different school district. His explanation for his whereabouts on the morning Lacey vanished? "I was home sleeping. I didn't know the girl." His trailer was searched. No red jacket. No blood. No trace of Lacey. Still, whispers about Myers started to swirl. Students at Briar Glen described him as creepy and quiet. Parents began protesting his employment. By the end of the week, he was placed on indefinite leave, pending the investigation. The second person of interest was someone much closer to home, Jeffrey Talbot. Police had no reason to suspect him at first. But public suspicion doesn't wait for probable cause. The separation between Jeff and Claire was recent. Some neighbors claimed to have heard arguments. One even alleged Jeff had slapped Lacey during a disagreement weeks before. Jeff denied it vehemently. And he had an airtight alibi. Gas station security footage showed him pumping fuel at 7:40 a.m., after Lacey had already vanished. Still, people started watching him differently. At vigils, parents gave him wide space. Rumors floated like smoke across backyards and church pews. On day 4, a potential break. A retired neighbor on Birch Street, about 4 blocks east, reported seeing a dark blue van idling by the curb just after 7:30 a.m. She said she noticed it because it didn't belong to anyone on the block. Police canvassed the area. No one else recalled the van. No plates. No photos. Just a vague memory from an old woman with failing eyesight. But it was something. The search widened. That weekend, the Wexley PD drained Noble Quarry, an old gravel pit where teens sometimes went to smoke or fool around. Dive teams found nothing. The water was freezing, murky, and littered with debris. They searched the quarry for 3 days and came up empty. "It felt like we were chasing a ghost," Sergeant Ellison admitted in a press conference. "Someone took her and knew exactly how not to be seen." Day 6 came and went. So did day 7. Then came the shift, the subtle but unmistakable pivot in tone that haunts cold cases. On day 8, police announced that no foul play had been confirmed and no suspects were being pursued at this time. The official statement left room for the possibility of a runaway. Claire exploded. "My daughter didn't run away. You think she left her blood-stained bag in a field to scare us? That note? That was her way of saying help me. She didn't leave, she was taken." The public was divided. Some supported Claire. Others began speculating that maybe, just maybe, Lacey had wanted to disappear. Teen girls did it all the time, right? But there was no bus ticket. No clothes missing. No money withdrawn. No online messages. No contact. Ever. 1 week turned into 2. Then a month. Claire stayed home making phone calls. Jeff started attending counseling. The room that was once Lacey's became a shrine. Her sneakers by the door. Her diary untouched. Her art still taped to the fridge. And the town of Wexley? It became something else entirely. People locked their doors for the first time in decades. Mothers walked their children to the bus stop, refusing to let them go alone. Kids were kept inside. Trust had been replaced by quiet fear. And still, no one knew who had done this. But someone did. Someone still lived in that town. Someone who watched the vigils, who heard the sirens, who read the articles and nodded quietly to themselves when the news said, "No foul play suspected." They had done what few criminals ever do, commit a perfect vanishing. It had been 7 months since Lacey vanished. The leaves had turned. Halloween passed without decoration. Thanksgiving arrived, but the Talbot house remained silent. Claire couldn't bring herself to cook. She left a single candle lit in the front window all day, hoping maybe someone would drive by, maybe the person who knew something. By Christmas, the case had faded from headlines. There were other stories, other crimes, new faces on the evening news. And still the Talbot family waited. The official case file labeled Lacey Talbot as a missing juvenile, status unknown. No new tips had come in for weeks. The task force had long since disbanded. Sergeant Ellison was reassigned to burglaries. But Claire never stopped. She started a Facebook group. She posted weekly flyers. She joined online communities of families with missing children, clinging to patterns and theories, reaching out to podcasts and independent sleuths. Then in early October, something unexpected arrived, not from a detective or news outlet, but from a janitor at St. Mark's Lutheran Church, a half-mile from the Talbot home. The man, Ben Heller, had been cleaning out the lost and found closet in the church's basement. He was sorting through old coats and children's books when he came across a dusty box of Bibles. Inside one of the Bibles, wedged between the book of Psalms and Proverbs, was a folded, yellowing piece of notebook paper. Written in shaky, all-capital letters were the words, "I didn't mean to hurt her. I'm not like him. She just knew too much." And beneath that, something chilling. BG, March 96. Ben reported the note to the church deacon, who turned it over to Wexley PD. Within 24 hours, Sergeant Ellison was back on the case. The note was immediately logged, photographed, and analyzed. It was written in ballpoint pen on college-ruled paper. The ink faded slightly from age. Forensic handwriting analysis began, but results were inconclusive. No fingerprints. No DNA. Still, the initials BG raised eyebrows. Could it mean Briar Glen, Lacey's school? Or someone with those initials? Or was it planted, a fake years later? Claire's reaction was visceral. That was real. I don't care what the labs say, that was real. Someone couldn't keep quiet anymore. The church was searched. Nothing else turned up. Sergeant Ellison began re-interviewing everyone on the original suspect list. One of those people, you guessed it, was Todd Myers, the former school janitor. His full name? Todd Benjamin Granger. Initials BG. At the time, Todd had moved to a neighboring county. He was unemployed, living with his elderly mother. Police brought him in again. This time he was less cooperative. He denied writing the note. Denied ever attending or stepping foot inside St. Mark's Church. When asked if he recognized the handwriting, he claimed he was being set up. But this time the media caught wind. The note in the Bible became the new headline. Mystery note in church may link to 1996 Lacey Talbot case. I didn't mean to hurt her. Bible note shocks small town. Janitor questioned again as case reopens. Claire did interviews with WEX9 Dateline and an online podcast dedicated to cold cases. She pleaded for anyone who had ever attended St. Mark's in 1996 to come forward. 2 elderly parishioners recalled seeing a man with a limp hanging around the church in the weeks before Lacey's disappearance. They described him as white, early 40s, maybe maintenance or custodial. But neither could confirm if it was Todd Granger. Ellison requested a search warrant for Granger's residence. The judge denied it, citing lack of probable cause. The note, while strange, was not enough to directly tie him to the crime. For Claire, it was a punch in the gut. For Ellison, it was the tip of a loose thread. He did what good detectives do, he started pulling. Behind the scenes, Ellison began checking maintenance contracts at nearby buildings from that year. He learned that St. Mark's had outsourced part-time custodial work to a private company in early 1996. One of the contracted employees? Todd Granger. His name never appeared on payroll, he was paid under the table. That's how he'd stayed off the radar. Claire was right. Granger had been there. With that, Ellison filed a second request for a warrant, this time with stronger evidence. Meanwhile, the community buzzed. The Talbots began receiving anonymous letters, some offering condolences, others taunting them with cryptic, typed messages. One envelope had no return address, but the words were burned into Claire's mind. She's closer than you think. The search warrant for Todd Granger's residence was signed at exactly 9:16 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday morning, nearly 8 months after the disappearance of Lacey Talbot. Detective Sergeant James Ellison and a small task force of Wexley PD officers and county deputies arrived at the address, a crumbling one-story home nestled in the pine outskirts of Millbury, about 30 minutes outside Wexley. Granger had been living there with his 78-year-old mother, who greeted the officers in slippers and a robe. She seemed disoriented, even confused, and didn't protest when the warrant was presented. Granger was not home at the time of the search. He'd taken a temporary groundskeeping job 2 towns over. That left them alone in a house filled with secrets. The interior was what you might expect. Aged wallpaper peeling at the corners, a persistent smell of damp wood and cat litter, shelves of canned goods lining the hallway. But it was the back bedroom that drew Ellison's attention. It was locked. Mrs. Granger claimed not to have a key. She called it Todd's space. When officers forced it open, what they found was enough to send shivers up every spine in that house. There were no photos of Lacey. No blood. No red jacket. But there were boxes. Dozens of them. Each one filled with items from local teenage girls. Yearbooks, class rosters, hand-drawn art, even discarded essays and report cards. Some looked like they'd been dug out of trash bins. Others, it was harder to explain how he'd gotten them. In one box, labeled Briar Glen 1996, officers found a school map with hallways marked in red ink. A bus route schedule highlighting stops within walking distance of the Talbot house. A disposable camera with undeveloped film. And most disturbingly, a hand-scrawled list of observation notes, times girls walked alone, what they wore, what direction they turned, and whether they were approachable. Next to one girl's name, not Lacey's, the word "too smart" was circled 3 times in red ink. None of it was enough to prove a kidnapping. But it was enough to prove obsession. When Granger returned home and saw the cruisers parked out front, he didn't try to run. Instead, he walked straight up to Sergeant Ellison and said quietly, "You won't find her in there." He was arrested on the spot. Granger's interrogation lasted nearly 6 hours. He denied everything. "I'm not a criminal. I never touched that girl. I didn't even know her name until it was on the news." But when presented with the note found in the church Bible, and shown documentation of his off-the-books employment at St. Mark's, his facade cracked. "That wasn't a confession," he snapped. "That was something I wrote in therapy. Years ago. I put it in a Bible because I didn't want my mother finding it." The story was bizarre. Granger claimed the note was about a former girlfriend from his early 20s, not Lacey. He said he suffered from intrusive thoughts, and was undergoing treatment at the time. Detectives found no record of therapy. But Granger was clever. He never confessed. He never slipped. Not once. And without direct evidence, no fingerprints on the backpack, no DNA, no witness linking him to Lacey the day she disappeared, the DA couldn't press charges for kidnapping or murder. Instead, he was charged with stalking, unlawful surveillance, and harassment after items in the boxes linked him to 3 other minor victims in the area. He received 9 years in prison, not for what he may have done to Lacey but for what he definitely did to others. For Claire and Jeff Talbot, it felt like being stabbed twice. Once by the abduction, again by the system. "He took my daughter," Claire told WX9. "But he'll be out in a few years, and I'll still have an empty chair at my kitchen table." The case once again went cold. The boxes were logged into evidence. The FBI reviewed them but found nothing that directly tied to Lacey. Her name was never mentioned. Her image never appeared. Her scent had long since faded from the clothes in the bag. Still, the court-mandated psychological evaluation of Granger was unnerving. He was described as intelligent, socially disconnected, prone to obsessive behavior, and capable of disassociation. The report noted he showed no emotional response when shown photos of Lacey during questioning. And yet, one line stood out from the final paragraph of that file. Subject exhibits signs of guilt, but only when asked about consequences, not the act itself. In other words, he feared punishment, not what he may have done. To Claire, that was all she needed to hear. "I know it was him," she said to a local reporter. "But if they're waiting for a body to call it murder, they might as well wait forever." Granger began his sentence at Millbury Correctional, where he rarely spoke to anyone. He refused interviews. Never confessed. Never mentioned Lacey again. But 3 months into his prison term, Claire received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside, a single piece of notebook paper, the same kind found in the church Bible, and a scribbled message. "You were right about the door." That was it. Claire hadn't spoken publicly about the door. The sound of it closing, the last thing she heard that morning, not to the police, not to reporters, not even to Jeff. Only Lacey and whoever took her would know that. By the time Todd Granger had been locked away for 6 months, Claire Talbot had lost all faith in the justice system. Her grief had calcified into obsession. Every spare wall in her house was now covered in maps, articles, case files, school rosters from 1996, and even scribbled notes from armchair detectives who messaged her online. What had once been a mother's desperate hope had become something more methodical, more forensic. She stopped going to church, stopped seeing friends. Her job let her go after too many absences. Even Jeff, who had tried so hard to stay strong for her, finally stopped coming by. "I need to move on," he'd said one night, standing in the hallway of their now divided home. "But you're still in the moment she left. You've never left that morning." Claire didn't respond. She just stared at the wall, where a pinned string ran from a photo of Granger to a blurry surveillance still of a blue van. But it wasn't the photos or maps that haunted her most. It was that second note. "You were right about the door." She had never mentioned that sound to anyone. Only Lacey would have known how loud their side door slammed. The implication was chilling. Someone had been listening that morning. And worse, they were still out there. The question that now clawed at her wasn't just what happened to Lacey, but who else knew. On a gray afternoon in early March, Claire did something she'd sworn not to. She visited Granger in prison. She didn't schedule a visit through official channels. She simply showed up, sat in the waiting area, and asked to speak with him. To her shock, he agreed. The man who shuffled into the visitation room didn't look like a monster. He looked old, worn down. But his eyes, cold and still, hadn't changed. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, sitting across from her. "I don't know what you think you'll get." Claire placed a small photograph of Lacey between them on the glass divider. "You left that note. You knew about the door." That wasn't a confession, it was a taunt. "Why?" Granger didn't answer at first. Then, he leaned in slowly and said something that turned her blood to ice. "Sometimes it's worse not knowing. That's the real punishment." She nearly screamed. Instead, she stood up and walked out. That night, Claire returned home and reviewed a long-ignored piece of evidence, the original 911 call transcript. She had read it hundreds of times, but this time, she noticed something. A time discrepancy. She told dispatch that she hadn't seen Lacey since she left for school at 7:28 a.m. But the call itself wasn't logged until 8:51 a.m., more than an hour later. Claire had always told others she called right away, and she believed she had. So what happened in that lost hour? In a sudden panic, she called Jeff. Asked him a question she'd never thought to before. "When you came by that morning, did you see anything? Anything strange?" There was a pause. "Claire," he said, "we were going through a separation. I wasn't trying to get involved. But yeah, there was a car. A white Civic. Parked across the street. I figured it was a neighbor." Claire's heart pounded. That car had never been in any report. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I didn't think it meant anything. I was late for work, I didn't know." Fueled by rage and new suspicion, Claire did something reckless. She posted a $25,000 private reward for any confirmed sighting of a white Honda Civic on Eldridge Street between 7 o'clock and 9 a.m. the day Lacey disappeared. The post went viral, shared over 80,000 times in 3 days. And then, a message came in. From a man named Tommy Randall, a former delivery driver who lived in Wexley in 1996. He'd seen the post, and he remembered that morning. "There was a white Civic," he said over the phone. "It was parked outside 182 Eldridge. I saw a girl get in, she looked like she was crying." Claire froze. "Do you remember who was driving?" "Couldn't see. But I remember the license plate. At least the first part. XJV. I only remembered because that was my initials back in Catholic school. It stuck with me." Claire hung up and immediately called Sergeant Ellison. Within days, the police tracked down archived DMV records. The plate matched a vehicle registered in 1996 to a woman named Anna Mireles. Anna was a substitute art teacher, and she worked at Briar Glen Elementary. She had never been interviewed. What? Because at the time of the investigation, she'd already left Wexley. She'd taken a job in another county 3 weeks before Lacey disappeared. But here's the kicker. Anna Mireles had a brother, Lucas Mireles, who had previously been convicted of child endangerment in 1989, then disappeared off the grid after a plea deal and probation. Claire's theory clicked like a loaded chamber. He was driving her car. He knew the school. He saw Lacey. Maybe followed her. Maybe he offered her a ride. Maybe he was someone she'd met before. Someone who smiled just enough to make her feel safe. Police reopened the files. Lucas Mireles' name was added to the suspect list. nearly a decade late. A statewide APB was issued, but he was gone. Vanished. Another ghost. The search for Lucas Mireles intensified over the next 8 weeks. His name was added to the FBI's national database under persons of interest for multiple cold cases. Wexley PD worked with state troopers and even reached out to America's Most Wanted, who aired a feature on the 1996 disappearance of Lacey Talbot. Thousands of tips came in. None led anywhere. Until one call changed everything. It came from Alamogordo, New Mexico, a small desert town where a young man now in his late 30s remembered a neighbor named Lou, who had worked odd jobs, mostly auto repairs and landscaping. He drove a rusted white Civic and was known for being paranoid and avoiding cameras. But Lou had vanished in 2005 after a fire destroyed the cabin he lived in. Local authorities searched the property, and what they found was chilling. Buried in a collapsed root cellar, they discovered a red nylon backpack, badly degraded, but containing items that had survived the heat. Among them, a bracelet with LT etched in the plastic. A math worksheet with Lacey's name barely visible. A page torn from a journal reading only. The last one. Never again. But she saw it. She knew. And I couldn't let her leave. DNA from the backpack's interior lining matched Claire Talbot's mitochondrial DNA, confirming familial relation. It was enough to finally change the case status. Lacey Talbot was officially declared deceased. The press swarmed. Headlines filled with phrases like, "Cold case cracked in the desert." Lacey Talbot's remains believed found in New Mexico. 26-year mystery nears end with shocking discovery. But the remains themselves? They weren't there. No body. No bones. Just the backpack. And words scribbled on aging paper that would never stand up in court. Lucas Mireles, if he had ever truly existed under that name again, was gone. Possibly dead, possibly vanished into another life. Claire attended the press conference. But she didn't speak. She didn't cry. She stood there holding Lacey's old hairbrush in one hand and a folded piece of paper in the other. The Bible note. The finality didn't bring peace. It brought clarity. Justice doesn't always mean handcuffs, Claire told Sergeant Ellison. Sometimes it just means the world finally knows what you already lived through. She held a private memorial 3 weeks later at Maple Hollow Park. No cameras. No speeches. Just 13 trees planted along the walking trail, each with a small wooden plaque etched with the names of missing girls across the state. Lacey's tree was the tallest. Among the attendees were former classmates, Jeff Talbot, Detective Ellison, and one young woman who approached Claire afterward. "I was almost one of them," she whispered. "He tried to follow me once. In that same car. I never told anyone because I was ashamed. But I remember her face. I remember Lacey. She was always kind." Granger, still serving his sentence in Millbury Correctional, never spoke about Lacey again. He refused all interviews and appeals. But in a final twist of fate, prison guards intercepted a letter from his cell in 2025. It was never mailed, but addressed in chilling handwriting. "To the one who knew what I couldn't say." Inside was a drawing. A crude sketch of a white car parked in front of a house. A stick figure walking away. Another standing in the window. Below it, a sentence. "I watched. I didn't stop him. That was my sin." It was enough to confirm what many had long suspected. Granger hadn't abducted Lacey himself, but he'd seen it happen. And done nothing. The town of Wexley eventually renamed a portion of the school campus Lacey Talbot Memorial Garden. Every spring, the students of Briar Glen plant a row of daisies for the missing. Claire started a foundation, Gone Without a Sound, which helps fund private investigations into cold cases where children vanished without a trace. The organization has since helped reopen 12 other unsolved cases. For Claire, the loss will never fade. But now, there's no more silence. Only the voice of truth, echoing from what was hidden for too long. If Lacey's story moved you, don't let it fade into another forgotten case. Subscribe for more gripping real-life stories. Like, comment, and share to keep her voice alive. And remember, justice delayed is not always justice denied. Let's speak for those who no longer can.